La Paz, Bolivia, 1980. For months, La Paz, the capital of Bolivia, has swirled with rumours of a coup as the weak government tottered on its heels. The whole city seemed to be holding its breath. Then, today, the bullets started flying. Now you're caught in the middle. A simple journey to work has turned into a desperate attempt to survive as the city turns into a hellscape. As your bus drove past the defense ministry, it was raked by machine gun fire. By some miracle, you weren't hit. Others were not so lucky. Now you are trapped, hiding behind the bus as the loyalists and coup supporters battle it out. Then you hear an all too familiar sound. Risking a peek, you see a tank driving up. The barrel of its gun swivels until it's aiming at the bus. Before you know what is happening, you're running as fast as you can, bullets snapping at your heels. The bus turns into a fireball as the shell strikes. Everywhere, shops are being looted. Civilians flee, looking for safety, or at least somewhere to hide. When you stop running, exhausted, you find yourself near the Bolivian Workers' Center. It's here that your luck runs out. Cars speed up, pouring out armed men. They are masked and dressed in black uniforms. Many wear swastika armbands. As they storm into the center, one of them spots you. "Red swinehund, get on the floor!" he screams with a strong German accent. With his boot on your back, a machine gun pressing into your head, you watch as a small old man, surrounded by gunmen, approaches. He is short, with thinning hair, bushy brows, and cold, dead eyes. Your guard eagerly says, "Joel, Herr Oldman, I have caught the red." In a quiet, thin voice, the old man replies, "He is a nobody. We have bigger targets." The gunman smiles at you cruelly. "Looks like you got lucky, swinehund." With a kick to your stomach, he marches off to help the other masked men as they drag people out of the workers' center, blindfolded and tied up. It is as well for your peace of mind that you do not know Herr Altman's real identity. He is Klaus Barbie, formerly of the Gestapo. The infamous Butcher of Lyon has just seized control of Bolivia. I'm your host, James Barton. Welcome to Forgotten Wars.
This country is at war with Germany.
Today, our armed forces joined our NATO allies in airstrikes against Serbian forces.
Eagle 1, first unit, you have permission to engage the target.
In the first few hours after our servicemen went to the rescue of young Americans and of democracy in Grenada,
Da wird uns ausgebildet. Wollen diese 4 Jahre nützen.
Hello everyone, welcome to the show. Today's episode covers a story that seems so outlandish it feels like it's out of the pages of an airport novel or maybe a trashy B-movie. Yet it is all 100% true. It's not a straightforward war story like previous episodes, but a tale of how one war criminal escaping justice fueled decades of wars, coups and drug trafficking. South America still bears the scars of Klaus Barbie's escape. Join me as we head into a murky world of intelligence agencies, the Vatican, cocaine and neo-fascists. 1980 was a wild year. The Empire Strikes Back dominated the box office. Ronald Reagan had just beaten Jimmy Carter for the US presidency. Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister in the UK. And Pac-Man had just come out in Japan. World War II already seemed far in the past. How then did ex-Nazis become strong enough to take over Bolivia? To understand, we have to head back to the dark days of the German occupation of France. Klaus Barbie was one of the most evil and most brutal men to have served the Nazi regime. Quite an achievement considering the competition. As a Gestapo agent, he sought out opponents of the Nazis in the Netherlands, chasing them down with dogs. He'd also worked for the Nazi mobile death squads on the Eastern Front, massacring Slavs and Jews. If that wasn't enough, he would reach true infamy as the Gestapo chief of Lyon. Upon arriving in France, Barbie's first words were, "I have come to kill." He was a man of his word. Setting himself up in the luxury hotel Terminus, he mercilessly tortured thousands of people as he hunted down Jews and the French resistance. Among his victims were 34 Jewish children, who he sent to Auschwitz, and the leader of the French resistance, John Moulin. He would earn the nickname the Butcher of Lyon, and was responsible for the deaths of at least 25,000 people, if not a lot more. When Nazi Germany was defeated, Barbie was third on the most wanted list of fugitive war criminals that the Allies were, supposedly, searching for. In reality, the Americans knew exactly where he was. Did they arrest him for his crimes? No, they did not. Instead, they recruited him as an agent and then protected him from justice. The alliance that won the Second World War was breaking down. The Iron Curtain had descended across Europe. China would soon fall to communism, and the Cold War was just beginning. This atmosphere of conspiracy and paranoia, Nazi war criminals suddenly turned into valuable assets, who were sought out by all of the former Allied nations. An American agent working for the Counterintelligence Corps, now part of military intelligence, Robert Taylor, made the first contact with Barbie. Taylor had been introduced to Barbie by Kurt Merck, also on the CIC payroll, and formerly a specialist with the Abwehr, the German wartime military intelligence service. Merck told Taylor he had bumped into Barbie in a train station and remembered him as, quote, "one of the best counterintelligence men in France during the German occupation," end quote. Taylor said he recognized Barbie's name from a wanted fugitive list, but decided, along with his CIC commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Dale Garvey, to hire him without telling their superiors. Taylor described Barbie as, quote, "an honest man, both intellectually and personally, absolutely without fear. A Nazi idealist who believes he and his ideals were betrayed by the Nazis in power." End quote. Amazing naivety or amazing cynicism on display there. I'll let you decide which. Interestingly, Barbie was mostly used to spy on America's own allies. With the CIC worried that France was infiltrated by communists, Barbie's main role was spying on French intelligence activities in the French occupation zone in Germany, and their agents operating in the US zone. He also had a nice sideline in identifying ex-Nazis that the British, French and Soviet Union were trying to recruit, allowing America to get in there first with a job offer. The CIC certainly seems to have valued his services highly, paying him in commodities such as cigarettes, medicines, sugar and gasoline that he sold for a handsome price on the black market. One of his handlers estimated he was on a salary of at least $1,700 a month. Take into account that the average US private, who had just fought their way across occupied Europe, was on a starting salary of just $50 a month. And they say crime doesn't pay. However, by 1948, France had learned that America was hiding Barbie and began to turn up the heat, demanding he be turned over for trial for his crimes. The CIC replied with the old strategy of deny, delay, defend to avoid this. First, they claimed they had no idea where he was. The French must have been given incorrect information. Next, they downplayed the horrors of Barbie's atrocities, claiming, quote, "The allegations of the citizens of Lyons can be disregarded as being hearsay only," end quote. CIC Captain Eugene Kolb even went so far as to claim that Barbie was such an excellent intelligence officer that he, quote, "didn't need to use force to get information during an interrogation," end quote. I'm sure that was comforting to the people of Lyon. Even in retirement, when Barbie was finally caught, Kolb told reporters that Barbie was, quote, "damn useful and damn good at it," end quote. By 1950, the pressure was getting too much, but the US still didn't want to hand him over. Partly, this was to avoid embarrassment for employing him in the first place, but mostly, they didn't want him passing over CIC secrets to the French. Instead, they decided they were going to help him escape to South America, the destination of choice for Nazis and their allies fleeing justice. A short train ride to Italy, and Barbie was introduced to his tour guide, who would help him on his way. Catholic priest Father Krinoslav Dragonovic. Four men sit in the office in the Vatican. The heat of Rome is oppressive. You and your colleague are American intelligence agents, and you wish a window could be opened. However, it is too dangerous in case anyone recognizes Barbie, who is not even sweating. Maybe he really is cold-blooded. The fourth man is dressed as a Catholic priest. His face looks cunning, however, and his mouth seems to have a permanent smirk. If the rumours are true, Father Draganovic has a record that may even rival Barbie's. You need have no fear, Mr. Barbie. I am quite the expert at helping those who are unjustly slandered by the communists and their lies, he says. I met your Fuhrer once, a great man. Raised a Catholic, you know. All the best leaders are. Mussolini, Franco, the list goes on. Such a shame. If only he had reached Moscow, then our world would be so much better. You exchange a startled look with your colleague. Better get this wrapped up quickly before they start reminiscing. Draganovic seems to snap out of his revelry. Argentina is too obvious for a man of your, shall we say, distinction? I have another destination in mind, Bolivia. More obscure. Of course it will be expensive. I am only a humble man of the church. There is no money in serving our Lord. I'm sure you understand. You very much doubt he is poor, noticing the greed on his face as you hand over the cash. A sinister smile floats across Draganovic's mouth as he turns to Barbie. Altman. Klaus Altman will be your new name. I think you will enjoy Bolivia. It is a land of opportunities for men such as yourself. Draganovic was a war criminal himself, a former lackey of the German puppet government in Croatia. He had shipped hundreds of thousands of Jews to the death camps. As the war turned against the Axis, he had fled to the safety of the Vatican. He made a fortune out of rescuing his former comrades in arms, running so-called rat lines to South America. 9,000 war criminals would escape justice to live prosperous lives in the sun. A memo from an intelligence officer working at the US State Department explained that, quote, the Vatican justifies its participation by its desire to infiltrate not only European countries, but Latin American countries as well, with people of all political beliefs as long as they are anti-communist and pro-Catholic Church." End quote. While we have all heard the jokes about Nazis living in South America, it is really hard to believe just how powerful many of them became among the dictatorships that flourished there. South America was the destination of choice for Nazis and their allies fleeing from justice. The majority went to Argentina, then under the dictatorship of Juan Perón. Yep, the husband of the famous Evita Perón. Though Chile, Brazil, and of course Bolivia were also welcoming. Before we move on with our tale, I just have to share this story I found while researching this episode. President Perón was anxious to develop his country and fell for the tall tales of a third-rate Nazi aircraft designer called Ronald Richter. Richter promised Perón that he could create a cold fusion generator, if he was liberally funded, of course. This was ludicrous. It's still beyond our abilities today. But Perón believed him and spent a fortune building Richter, a massive, heavily guarded complex of giant concrete megastructures on Hummel Island. Did I mention that this was located in the middle of a mountain lake in the Andes? I will never again claim a Bond villain's lair is ridiculously over the top, ever again. Hollowed out volcano? Sure thing. Luckily for the world, Richter was a complete fantasist, whose PhD thesis had been publicly disavowed by his former university. When Perón discovered he was a fraud, the whole base was levelled and Richter was thrown into prison. Later, he became a humble chicken farmer, but still refused to learn Spanish, as it was, quote, "a language for the monkeys," end quote. Let us all just ponder the fact that, for a brief while, a Nazi scientist had a fortified base on an island on top of a mountain where he was trying to create a small sun. It's the plot of a B-movie, but it really happened. Back to the Butcher. Fascism in Bolivia had deep roots, with the Bolivian Socialist Falange, the second biggest party in the country until the 80s. One of the first sights Barbie saw after his arrival in La Paz was a march by FSB members. He later claimed that the sight of the uniformed, armband-wearing militants giving the Roman salute made him feel right at home, and he soon sought out the party's leading members. To them, he became something of a hero. Bolivia can proudly lay claim to the dubious title of having the most coups in history. Since independence in 1825, there have been more than 190 coups. The fascists of the Falange backed the various military dictators who seized power, and would be the reason why Barbie would later go on to make friends with some very influential people. There was also a large German community for him to disappear into, centred on the now notorious Club Allemand. This was the social club of the German migrants. Allegedly, in its basement, it had the best collection of Nazi memorabilia in the whole of the New World. When a naive German ambassador paid a visit, he literally ran out when patrons started drunkenly singing songs praising the Führer. It was the perfect place for Barbie to hold court. At first, his activities were fairly legal. He invested in a sawmill and lived the life of a small businessman, most likely fearing bringing too much attention on himself. Still, he could not resist cutting little swastikas into the trees he felled. It wasn't until the 1960s that his special skill set he developed back in Lyon suddenly became in demand. The military had taken power again under René Barrentos, but they faced left-wing protests and guerrilla fighters who threatened their rule. The Falange recommended Herr Altmann. It was a match made in heaven, and soon he became a security consultant to the regime. He trained a whole generation of Bolivian soldiers and security service agents how to brutally torture victims and crush insurgencies. Apparently his students loved him and took to calling Altman, rather disturbingly, Papa. He was so successful that he was soon also advising far-right juntas in Argentina and Peru as they battled left-wing militants. He would later claim to have been responsible for hunting down and killing Che Guevara when the famous revolutionary was killed in Bolivia. This was mostly exaggeration on his part. Barbie wasn't actually directly involved in Che's death, but it was his former pupils who did the dirty work of tracking down Che. One even took some mementos so he could share them with Papa. Creepy. When Barrentos died in an unfortunate helicopter accident, most likely he was assassinated, his successor, the even more repressive General Hugo Banzer, became Barbie's latest sugar daddy. He made the wanted war criminal a lieutenant colonel in the Bolivian army and allowed him to set up some large and very profitable arms deals for his regime, mostly from Germany and Austria. All the while, Barbie was also acting as a spy for the BND, West Germany's intelligence service. They knew exactly who this Herr Altman was, but they were still happy to recruit him and pay him. Maybe because the BND had been formed and staffed by former Nazi intelligence officers. Barbie was flying high, and things were only going to get better, thanks to a certain white powder. It was the 70s, and cocaine had taken the world by storm. It was everywhere, from the yachts and exclusive clubs of the super-rich to the ghettos of North American cities. People were sniffing Colombian marching powder. While we associate cocaine production with Colombia, the raw product needed to make it, the paste from the coca plant, mostly came from Bolivia. General Banzer saw an opportunity and wanted some of that sweet cocaine cash for his regime. He introduced his favourite Nazi to a good friend of his, Roberto Suarez, who needed someone with Barbie's skill set. Suarez is the biggest drug kingpin you have never heard of, just as important as Pablo Escobar or the Gentleman of Cali in his day. The drug baron Sosa in the movie Scarface is actually based on him. Born into a wealthy family that had made their money from rubber and cattle ranching, he was already the largest landowner in Bolivia. He even had a fleet of planes to supply the world with his beef. But with the meat trade in a downturn, Suarez was looking for a new moneymaker. He realized he could easily switch his land and plains to growing and distributing coca paste. The cocaine business wasn't quite as safe and secure as the meat industry had been. The Colombian cartels he was dealing with had a nasty habit of trying to avoid paying him. At the more sophisticated end of the scale, they handed over suitcases that only had real banknotes at the top of the pile. Hidden underneath was just waste paper. The more in-your-face method, associated mainly with Pablo Escobar's men, was to start shooting and then fly off into the sunset with Suarez's unpaid-for coca paste. This is why Suarez hired Klaus Barbie. The ex-Gestapo officer soon had an inventive solution to the problem. As you shield your eyes from the midday sun, you can spot a small plane coming ever closer over the horizon, the hum of the engines getting louder. You work for the richest man in these parts, El Jefe Suarez, and you are nervous. The last 2 times this particular plane has landed, the coked-up Colombians inside have refused to pay. With menaces, pistol whipping, and even the occasional murder, they have stolen the precious coca paste. But today, El Jefe promises things will be different. As the plane lands and comes to a stop, 2 Colombians leap out. Brash, arrogant, dark sunglasses, gold medallions, and condescending sneers on their faces. Yep, they're Escobar's men all right. You nervously wait, sweating bucket loads, as the coca paste is loaded onto the plane. With the work done, you ask for a payment, stuttering out the words. You don't have to pretend to be afraid. You really are. The Colombian laughs and fires into the air. You don't pay peasants. You gonna cause us trouble? As you frantically shake your head, the Colombians swagger off, and soon the plane is shuttling down the runway. But then, men with bazookas suddenly materialize out of the jungle. Before the plane can take off, they open fire. And it explodes in a ball of flames. El Jefe walks up with a small elderly gringo by his side. When the gringo speaks, it is with a strong German accent. We will fish out the remains later and send them to Escobar. He will get the message. Unsurprisingly, Escobar started paying promptly. A new and much stronger business alliance began between the two drug lords. Impressed by the results, Suarez made Barbie his full-time right-hand man. In return, he recruited Suarez a bodyguard made up of fanatical fascists from all four corners of the globe, led by a wanted German neo-Nazi named Joachim Fiedelkorn. The group included Rhodesian mercenaries, right-wing Italian bombers, former members of the Spanish Foreign Legion, and French OAS terrorists on the run after trying to assassinate Charles de Gaulle. As Fiedelkorn proudly reported, there were also several actual SS veterans, including, quote, Herbert Koplin, known for his sadism and for using the butt of his rifle to interrogate prisoners. End quote. Another associate was Stefano del Chia, the world's most notorious neo-fascist terrorist, who was hiding out in South America while wanted for questioning over his involvement in the Bologna bombing in Italy, which killed 85 people. What a lovely group of people indeed. Soon, Barbie had an elite force of 600 international fascists, ready to destroy Suarez's competitors. It was a real-life combination of Bond-villain army and axis of evil. They rampaged through the Bolivian countryside, killing, raping, and seizing control of coca paste production. They even gave themselves the rather grim nickname, the Fiancés of Death, stealing it from the former Spanish Foreign Legion. Not content with bloodshed in Bolivia and flooding the world with cocaine, Barbie also helped assemble a new axis of arseholes. Operation Condor involved such lovely people as Chile's Augusto Pinochet and the Argentinian junta, cooperating to murder dissidents abroad and crush revolution at home. The Fiancés of Death committed many assassinations for them, especially the Bologna butcher Chia. All this took place with the tacit support of the US and allegedly France, although it has always been denied. Yet there were clouds on the horizon for these Nazi drug lords. Their patron, General Banzer, had fallen from power after most of his family were revealed to be involved in the cocaine trade. What a surprise that must have been to Banzer. I'm sure he was shocked. US President Jimmy Carter had also cut off foreign aid due to the relentless coups in cocaine trafficking. It looked like Bolivia might return to democracy. Bad for Suarez, even worse for Barbie. His past crimes were finally beginning to catch up with him. A French husband and wife team, the Klausfelds, had brought international attention to Barbie's hideout in Bolivia and had even discussed kidnapping him and smuggling him out of the country to stand trial. Barbie, his fiancée of death, and his drug lord allies weren't going down without a fight, however. They decided to seize control of Bolivia for themselves. Their ally in this bold plan was General Garcia Meza, the head of the military academy and leader of the far-right faction in the army. Swastikas started appearing all over La Paz, along with the creepy slogan, "The Fourth Reich is rising." Barbie's international connections came in handy as he started calling in favours. Argentina, Chile, and even Pablo Escobar provided money, men and training. Argentina went as far as sending their best torturers and creating computerized lists of those marked for death at the hands of Barbie's goons. This wasn't a secret coup, however. Seemingly everyone in La Paz knew it was coming. A full month before the coup occurred, a Bolivian newspaper reported that, quote, "A leading businessman in La Paz has suggested that the possible army takeover next month should be called the cocaine coup," end quote. July the 17th, 1980, La Paz turned into a war zone. Barbie's fascist henchmen, wearing black masks and swastikas, stormed government buildings alongside far-right elements of the Bolivian military. Left-wing politicians were murdered and their bodies set on fire in the street. No one dared to put out the flames. After looting stores and warehouses, they made their way to the Bolivian Workers' Center we saw at the start of the episode. The last resistance to the coup was crushed. Those captured there were soon suffering electroshock torture, courtesy of machines nicknamed Barbie's babies. Just when you think Barbie can't behave any more like a supervillain, he still manages to plumb the depths. There was one last target for the fiancés of death. You're a guard at La Paz prison, and the world has gone to hell. Smoke billows up into the air, and the sound of machine gun fire echoes throughout the city. Desperately, you've been trying to get orders from the ministry, but no one is answering the phone. Then you see them approach. Jeeps and trucks, filled with masked men, speed towards the prison. Along with your fellow guards, you open fire. After raking one of the car's windshields with bullets, you have the pleasure of seeing it careen off the road and crash. But there are too many. You are pinned down as a fellow guard screams and clutches his stomach. Soon, you have to surrender. As you kneel on the floor with your hands behind your head, the prisoners are freed, mostly narcos. They march past cheering, fists in the air, chanting, "Old man! Old man!" Bolivia's new dictator, Garcia Meza, may have had the personality and intellect of a brick, but really he was just a frontman. Behind the scenes, it was Suarez and Barbie who now ruled Bolivia. The country quickly became a narco-state on an unparalleled level. The new interior minister, Luis Acre Gomez, had his own fleet of 13 airplanes flying cocaine to the US from a base up in Colombia. Soon the TV program 60 Minutes was calling him the Minister for Cocaine. A CIA agent stationed in Bolivia at the time recalled flying over, quote, "a jungle-based cocaine manufacturing complex containing laboratories, heavy armaments, radio communications, and landing fields that could accommodate a modern jumbo jet," end quote. He concluded that they were seeking to use the drug trade as the backbone of a, quote, a military-industrial setup right out of the West Point textbooks. It was unbelievable. In a truly darkly ironic move, Barbie's fiancés of death became the government's new anti-narco task force. They would use their new power to give Suarez a monopoly on coca paste production. Barbie was even given the use of an office in the Ministry of Interior and worked with Department 4, the intelligence section of the Bolivian army. This was the unit that monitored political opponents of the government. Soon they were being delivered to the tender-loving care of Klaus Barbie. It was now, at the peak of his power, that Barbie finally began to overreach. He plotted to turn Bolivia into a new Fourth Reich, a beacon around which international fascists could rally and rebuild Hitler's old dream. A new headquarters we built, in the shape of a swastika, of course, to direct a new wave of fascism, all funded by the profits of cocaine. Yet the coup was very reliant on the US recognizing the regime. However, Barbie's involvement and the blatant cocaine trafficking was too much even for Cold War Washington, D.C. Without US support, the coup collapsed in under a year. It has still managed to be Bolivia's bloodiest coup, killing well over 1,000 people, and many more tortured and imprisoned. Barbie was still safe for now, though, as a new military regime took over. He had one last Indian summer. A secret meeting was held in Panama, organized by Barbie. In attendance was a who's who of the cocaine trade. Pablo Escobar, near the peak of his power. Manuel Noriega, the shadow ruler of Panama. Suarez, and Barbie himself. In this meeting, they created the modern cocaine trade. While all would meet bad ends eventually, the structures they set up are still around today. Suarez in particular was doing well. His coca paste empire was bringing in $400 million a year and was regarded by US officials as the, quote, General Motors of the cocaine trade, end quote. Yet, finally, Barbie could no longer outrun justice. As democracy returned to Bolivia, a journalist called Gustavo Sanchez became Minister for Justice. Sanchez had once plotted with Nazi hunter Klausfeld to kidnap Barbie, and his first mission in government was to get rid of him. Barbie was arrested, supposedly for some minor tax evasion charges. Just like Al Capone, Sanchez drove him to the airport, where Barbie believed he would be flown to a Bolivian prison. On hearing he was actually going to France, Barbie became terrified, loudly shouting, quote, "It cannot be!" End quote. According to Sanchez, he told Barbie, quote, "Don't you remember the French adage, which says that a criminal always returns to the scene of the crime? Don't you remember sending 600,000 Jews to concentration camps and gas chambers, as you personally killed so many in Lyon? You are going back there." End quote. The former Gestapo officer simply stared at him blankly before trying to dismiss the charges by muttering, quote, "In the war, there were winners and losers." End quote. Sanchez agreed, adding, quote, "You lost. It's time to pay." End quote. He would die 8 years later in a prison in Lyon. Really, I still think he got off lightly. Justice delayed is justice denied. Escobar would die after being hunted by the Americans and the Colombian authorities. Noriega would spend the rest of his life in a prison after America invaded Panama and toppled his regime. Even Suarez didn't escape, ending up in prison and his empire dismantled. Yet, really, the whole story is a cautionary one. By allowing Barbie to escape, he brought death and destruction to South America. He built the modern cocaine trade with his allies. The names have changed and the distribution routes now go through Mexico, but we are very much still living in the cocaine world Barbie created. So next time you're laughing at a fantastical plot of a James Bond or Steven Seagal movie, just remember, once there was a Nazi war criminal who became a drug lord and almost built a Fourth Reich. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like, subscribe, leave a review, or tell a friend. I'm sorry this episode was a bit late. It was because I was having trouble uploading. Our next episode is a bit of a palate cleanser after Nazi war criminal drug lords. Find out how the shooting of an unarmed pig almost led to a war between America and Britain. Join me for the hilarious silliness of the pig war. See you next time for more Forgotten Wars.